Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar on automating for efficiency with Amazon Transcribe and Amazon Translate. My name is Niranjan here, and I'm a solutions architect with the Amazon Language Services teams. It's really cool to talk to you today about these new services that we just made available, generally available at the San Francisco Summit. What we'll do today is we'll first take a look at an intro for these services, we'll do a console walkthrough, and then we'll see some of the ways in which customers can use these services together. To give you some sense of the machine learning or artificial intelligence stack at AWS, let's take a look at some of the services that are available to customers. If you have mature deep learning expertise, or if you have workloads that are already based on artificial intelligence, you can certainly bring those over to AWS. So starting at that bottom layer where we talk about frameworks and interfaces, whether you use Caffe2 or whether you use TensorFlow, whether you use Keras, it really doesn't matter. All of those should work on AWS, and we have teams that work hard to ensure they do very well. If, on the other hand, you've done some of this before and you'd like to take a look at some of the newer services, Amazon SageMaker is a great new offering to help customers build, train, and host their machine learning models on AWS. A lot of the algorithms that were created specifically with Amazon SageMaker in mind, or more to the point, tuned for the purposes of being used on AWS, allow for highly efficient parallelized training. Finally, we look at this layer of application services, and this is where Amazon Transcribe and Amazon Translate sit. These services are really designed for application developers to quickly get started and see the promise of artificial intelligence without spending a whole lot of time building and training their custom models. So as an example, you might get started with recognition for vision, or you might get started with Amazon Poly for text-to-speech, without actually having to learn anything about machine learning, but believing that the deep learning behind the scenes is working in your favor. So what does Amazon Transcribe do? Well, let's think about the problem that we're working with. There's a tremendous amount of audio and video data that is generally available today. Think about every single business meeting that you've had, analyst calls, broadcast TV in the form of archives, all of the data on content providers. What if you could search through all of that? What if you could quickly look at the last 1 year's worth of meetings on a given project and say, well, when did we decide to do this particular thing? You can't do that with a whole lot of manual transcription. And this is where Transcribe comes in. Transcribe is a service that allows you to take audio and video data and generate accurate transcripts that include punctuation, that can label different speakers, and can specify exactly when a certain term was used with confidence data, so that you can then turn around and create searchable transcripts, or you could subtitle videos, or you could, for example, annotate existing data with quotes. So how does this work? Imagine for a second that you had an archive of a few hundred hours worth of video data. What I'd like to be able to perhaps do is to run that through Transcribe and get all of that metadata and create subtitles. Also be able to allow somebody to search through those subtitles, and better yet, look for every single time somebody's mentioned a particular term so that I can navigate through a large archive without having to see every single video. The whole point is to make this data much more discoverable, to make it a lot more fun to work with it. So as an organization, as a customer, I might be looking for voice of the customer data in the form of recorded calls. I might be looking through transcripts of call center interactions. I might be providing video in other forms to a whole new set of audiences. And I might also allow people to then get insight in the form of some of these calls to say, how many times did somebody call in asking for a flight upgrade, as an example. So let's take a look at some of the things that Amazon Transcribe can do. It works with multiple languages. It works with English and Spanish today, and others to come. It does a good job of adding punctuation, which is critical if you're trying to understand whether a request was made or if the request was really a statement instead. It's really helpful to see things like timestamps so that you can, down to the millisecond, say, well, this person on this frame of this video said it. It can attribute the speech to multiple speakers, which is great for when you're, for example, transcribing panel recordings. And here's something cool. What you can do is you can take terms that are new, or for example, specialized language, and you can add those terms to a custom vocabulary. Once you upload that vocabulary, your custom terms are used to augment the existing general purpose models so that Transcribe can now recognize new words. Finally, if you've got hundreds of hours worth of call center data, chances are you haven't recorded it in 48K or newer sampling. Chances are that it's recorded in mono data and it has one channel worth of 8K sample data. Well, Amazon Transcribe was built with these things in mind so that you can, with very minimal transcoding or rendering, turn around and just run through transcripts of your files. Let's take a look at what the console allows us to do. So here's the console that greets you when you first look at Amazon Transcribe. As you can see, it provides some of the features of the service, a gentle reminder of pricing, and you can see that there's a generous free tier for you to work with to start off, so you shouldn't have to worry about pricing up front. You can take a look at some of the services that relate to Amazon Transcribe. But let's jump right in. Let's try Amazon Transcribe. The way that you work with Amazon Transcribe is generally you submit transcription jobs for audio or video data that is stored on Amazon S3. So as an example, you would turn around and provide a custom job name. These job names are unique and useful for tracking your jobs. You would provide a link to the file that you're expecting Transcribe to work with, the language that you're asking Transcribe to assume. And this is extremely important when, for example, you've got audio or video data that works across multiple languages. You'd like to know what the dominant language was, so that's the one that Transcribe assumes. You can provide different kinds of data, so it's important to be able to say, well, I've got MP4 data or I've got WAV data. The idea here is to take what you've got rather than force you to go through a rendering exercise just to be able to upload your data for Transcribe to work with it. If necessary, you can provide the sampling rate. By default, Transcribe will infer this for you, so you don't actually need to provide it. And if you have created custom vocabulary, so custom vocabulary is a set of terms that you provide to say, hey, Transcribe, I also need you to remember and use these other terms. You can specify the custom vocabulary to use, and each account can have multiple different vocabularies to work with. And you can also then turn around and ask for speaker data. So said differently, who said what when? As an example, for a panel, you might say that you have 4 speakers, whereas for a typical interview, you might say that you have 2 speakers. This helps Amazon Transcribe distinguish between how many people it should attribute the speech to. But let's take a look at a job that's actually been run so that we see what that might look like. So here's an example of a completed job. In this case, the job name was a 1-minute video clip from the World News. You can see that the job completed successfully. The transcript is available on Amazon Transcribe for a period of 90 days from when the job completes. Here's a link back to the original video, and you can see that speaker identification was enabled. The transcript is available here immediately. And as you can see, there's timing data and the confidence with which text was attributed. And if you turn on this speaker identification, you can also see different speakers. The request that's sent, and we'll see this as an example with the CLI, the request that's sent can include the same amount of information we saw in the previous form. And the response then has this transcript file URI. Now this transcript file URI is a link to the results that are available to a select set of users who have access to this link. The link expires on a regular basis for security, so that the idea is you can share this link for a limited amount of time with somebody who can download the transcript and then work with it. So let's take a look at what this CLI does. Like the other services, Amazon Transcribe also has a command line experience, and that makes it easier to, for example, run jobs and to follow those jobs at scale. So here's a quick subset of the commands that are available. You can use the help to do that. You can also take a look at the documentation. But here's a job that I started earlier. Let's take a look at what's happening to it. So just as we saw on the console, you can see that when you run get transcription job, you see the current status of the job, you see the data that it was working with, as well as a link to the transcript. This also allows you to, for example, be able to automate this so that, for example, if you had 100 S3 files or files on S3, you could run S3 event triggers and have those files be automatically transcribed. Now let's take a look at what it takes to submit a job. When we submit a job, you can provide most of the same values that we use the form for, more or less depending on your particular use case. In this particular case, we said that we have a media file, the MP4 file, and it's stored in a particular S3 bucket that I have access to. We specify its file format, the language code to be used, and we give the job a particular name. By giving the job that name, it allows us to then follow that job as we said. So let's take a look at whether that job is still running. And as you can see, it is. So while the job is running, you see things like this status that says the job is in progress. You see that the transcript is empty. But when the job is complete, as you saw from this earlier job, you see both the status has changed as well as a link to the transcript file URI is provided. So we saw what the console can do for Amazon Transcribe. We saw we can invoke jobs using the command line. Now let's move on to Amazon Translate. So Amazon Translate, as the name suggests, is a service that delivers fast and high-quality language translation. One of the critical pieces here is Amazon Translate uses a neural architecture, and so it benefits from some of the most recent advancements in the field. Again, both transcribe and translate depending on deep learning models that are continuously trained and managed by AWS so that you don't have to constantly keep updating them for your use cases. Today, Amazon Translate allows you to translate text from English to one of Arabic or Chinese simplified, French, German, Portuguese, Spanish, and vice versa. Coming soon, we're looking at languages such as Japanese, Russian, Italian, traditional Chinese, Turkish, and Czech. So let's take a look at why you might use Amazon Translate and where it fits best. Amazon Translate allows you to do real-time translation. It allows you to, for example, get through text that is produced on the fly in a chat transcript. It allows you to do batch translation for example, reams of data that you might have collected in the past for surveys. It allows you to detect language on the fly. One of the things that's really beneficial here is imagine social media sentiment analysis. As tweets come through, for example, you'd like to find out if a given tweet is in a language other than the normal language that you're working with. And once you've detected that it's in a different language, you'd like to translate it into a normalized language so that you can then put it through natural language processing with services like Amazon Comprehend or your custom models for gathering insight. Compared with human translation, Amazon Translate is an incredibly low-cost offering. And what it allows us with that kind of economic model is it allows us to take a look at a whole new set of use cases than were ever possible with human translation before. Rather than manually translating something, taking hours, sometimes weeks to do it, only to discover that the text in question is no longer relevant, what you can do is you can, within seconds, get really close to the same kind of accuracy that you might get from human translation, but sufficient accuracy to be able to say, yep, this is of importance, or no, this isn't of importance. So that is an incredibly important point. The fact that we don't want to use translation for legal documents that might be used directly. We'd like to be able to either augment the human translation sequence, or we'd like to use machine translation for things that are in the past not worth manually translating. So we think about high velocity data, high volume data, things that, for example, are produced by end users such as reviews, or for example, tweets, or for example, conversation in a forum. Those are the kinds of things that in the past may be too expensive for human translation or manual translation. And this is where Amazon Translate can help you bring those insights into the fold, as it were. If you were working on custom natural language processing models today, chances are you're happy to have those models in one language, and you're not, in fact, running out the door, jumping up with joy to try to replace those models with models in multiple languages. That presents a challenge to the business because you're doing business in multiple countries and you're collecting insight, as it were, data from multiple languages. Using Amazon Translate allows you to bring those languages and bring that text into the analysis cycle. So this is great for things like subtitles that we talked about, but it's also helpful when you're looking at, generally speaking, what are people complaining about? Whether they be saying it in Spanish or in Italian, chances are you'd get some of the same features being mentioned. So let's take a look at the Amazon Translate console. So when you first look at the Amazon Translate console, it looks very familiar because it is a lot like the Amazon Transcribe console, making it easier for you to find things. You look at the pricing information, again, a relatively generous free tier so that you can get started without having to worry about the price of POC, for example. You can see some of the other related services that you might want to try with Amazon Translate. For example, we talked a little bit about natural language processing service like Amazon Comprehend. Amazon Comprehend is a general purpose natural language processing service on the AWS stack. But let's take a look at Amazon Translate and see what we can do with it. So imagine for a second that I had some text in Spanish, which I have cleverly copied and pasted before we started this, and we wanted to translate it to English. You can certainly do this with the API, and we'll see that in a minute. But here's what that would look like on the console. So right here, within a few seconds, you can see what a piece of text really means in a language that you're familiar with. So in this particular case, this was a copy that was a news article. But imagine doing this at scale. Hundreds of reviews, thousands of news articles in a different language, then being able to parse that text and search through that text for particular mentions. Imagine if you were working on a new product that you had just launched in 5 different countries, but you were only looking at the reviews in English. What that would do is it would essentially blind you to a large part of the demographic. What this allows you to then do with Amazon Translate is to start looking at feedback in other languages. So here's then an example of the JSON request that is sent to the service and the response that comes back from the service. We can try that with the console next. Let's try the command line. So when we first get to the command line, as with the other services, you can see that Translate also has an API. You can use this API either with one of the SDKs like Python, Ruby, etc., or you could also use it right here. So in terms of clunky examples, here's the obligatory Hello World example. So here we're moving from Chinese simplified to English. I honestly don't know if somebody actually ever says this, but I felt necessary to show you how to do it. If you were trying to use the command line for yourselves, here's the sort of syntax that you might use. Now let's talk a little bit about how customers could use these services. Language services in general could be used for things like enterprise digital assistance, if you were thinking about the likes of Lex and Poly, thinking about semantic search with the likes of Amazon Comprehend. You can look at accessibility-based use cases with Transcribe and Translate. One of the important things that I wanted to try out today was to show you how you might subtitle video. So here's what a typical pipeline looks like for some of these services, whether it's Transcribe or Translate or Comprehend, tying these things together. There's some kind of media input, audio or video, that's ingested onto Amazon S3. When the file is present and available, that's when Lambda kicks off one or more of these jobs. There's often either step functions or SQS to simple queue service to coordinate those jobs between these services. At the end of it, the results are sent over back to S3, where the likes of Amazon Athena or Redshift or Amazon QuickSight can ultimately be used to process and to visualize that data. With Translate, we can see that we have the ability to invoke it using the SDK. But here's what a video subtitle job flow would look like. A transcribe job is submitted. We wait for the job to complete. Once the transcript is ready, and you saw how we might be able to get to that transcript, you can then translate those subtitles into one of many different languages that you'd like. You can write out these subtitle files, and we'll talk about precisely how you might do that in a minute. Then you can, for example, just to be clever, detect entities using Amazon Comprehend, and you can write them out into a quick little HTML wrapper that could be part of the human workflow in order to approve these subtitles before they're sent out. Remember that Amazon Transcribe is based on deep learning, so while it'll get a lot of things right, it's not expected to get absolutely everything right. So here's an example of what you can do with Amazon Translate and Transcribe put together. We started with a video, a news clip. It's a 1-minute news clip, so bear with me as we watch through it. We'll do this a couple of times. And we use Transcribe to get the text from it. And you can see some of that text right here. The gray text represents text that the confidence levels were lower for. And then you can also see on the right, we put that same transcript through Amazon Comprehend to see some of the entities that it detected. And then we have some sampling statistics over here. But let's first watch the video, and then we'll see some of the same subtitles.
This is BBC World News, the headlines. Syrian state television says international inspectors have arrived in the town of Douma, the scene of a suspected chemical weapons attack. There hasn't been independent confirmation of this. They were scheduled to begin their work on Wednesday. Japan's President Shinzo Abe will have 2 days of talks at his US counterpart Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago.
Now let's try to run through this with subtitles in English.
This is BBC World News, the headlines. Syrian state television says international inspectors have arrived in the town of Douma, the scene of a suspected chemical weapons attack. There hasn't been independent confirmation of this. They were scheduled to...
And now let's run through some of the same with Spanish. And you can see that it's the HTML5 video player that's taking care of the subtitles for us. All we've had to do is to create WebVTT files and make them available for hosting.
This is BBC World News, the headlines. Syrian state television says international inspectors have arrived in the town of Douma, the scene of a suspected chemical weapons attack. There hasn't been independent confirmation of this. They were scheduled to begin their work on Wednesday. Japan's President Shinzo Abe will have 2 days.
Now this is where we see the need for custom vocabulary. As you can see, Amazon Transcribe looked at President Shinzo Abe's name and thought it was somebody saying "our baby." We could either manually correct this, or we could create a custom vocabulary that adds Abe as a name, and then Amazon Transcribe would be expected to more accurately catch those names. But Besides that, what we've seen in essence is the ability to take a piece of video, the 1-minute clip that we talked about, be able to run that through Amazon Transcribe using a little bit of JavaScript to be able to take the output JSON and transform that into subtitles. Then turn around and to use Amazon Translate and Amazon Comprehend to be able to put together a web page that quickly allows us to see what this video might look like for somebody who might be responsible for ultimately getting this transcript complete. Great, so what we just saw was how we could use Amazon Transcribe with media that has been uploaded to S3 to then get the transcript, translate those subtitles, and write those subtitles out in different languages. Finally, we saw what an HTML wrapper, and again, that was just a quick edit of something that you might use, hoping that for production use cases, you'd use something a lot more interesting than that. The goal there was to show you what was possible with some of these services. But here's a little bit of what the HTML looks like. And you have to love HTML5 and their support of WebVTT, because as a developer, all I have to do is to produce HTML that refers to the original source media and provides subtitles as separate tracks. And what browsers will do is they'll automatically make those subtitles available to you in the way that we saw them. And then as you choose those different subtitles, the browser will request those subtitles from the server, and as long as the files are available in the way that you specified them. So in our case, I just use movie name _en versus movie name _es.vtt. Now let's take a quick look at what those files look like. If you're familiar with subrip or SRT subtitles, web video track or WebVTT is essentially a successor to SRT. It is a standard that has been proposed a while back, and the good news is that browsers now support it. And what this allows you to do as a developer is to produce something that is used without a whole lot of fuss with respect to how it is distributed. In terms of the way that the WebVTT file is created, it really just takes a little bit of text editing or clever scripting to be able to get there. Here's an example snippet on the right. As you can see, we provide timing. So in this case, we're saying at 8 seconds, 0.49 to 11 seconds, we'd like to present this piece of text on the video. And then the next cue is from 11.59 seconds to 14 seconds. One of the critical bits here is just how the timing from Amazon Transcribe is ultimately used with these kinds of subtitles. When you're working with translated titles, it's important to remember that the translation might change where the words are presented. So you need to write a little bit of code to handle exactly what part of the frame or when in the timing you want to present a piece of text. But that's the sort of thing that you can do with some of the timestamps that are available with Amazon Transcribe. So beyond subtitles, what are some of the things that you can do? Think about survey input files. So imagine that text input was being placed on Amazon S3 as people provided their feedback. Or for example, imagine that input was made available in a database where you were collecting data from a web form. In both of these cases, using triggers, whether they be S3 event triggers or whether they be DynamoDB or other database triggers, you can quickly turn around and normalize the text to the language that the analysis system is tuned to. So for example, if your analysis system was tuned to Spanish, then you could normalize all text into a separate column or separate attribute for Spanish, and then your NLP solution only winds up using that text. So take a look at that. We'd love to see some of the other things that you can do with it. What we're hoping to do is to see some of these new use cases that you come up with. Would love to be able to blog about some of those patterns. And most of all, we'd love to hear some of your feedback on what we can do to improve these new services. So thanks for watching, and hope to hear more from you.